Welcome to How Rockets Work. I'm Alex Most, president of the Hornet Rocket Club. I'm here to give you a simple overview of model rocketry as an introduction. Let's go over what How Rockets Work is. How Rockets Work is a basic introduction to the flight of model rockets. We'll go over what they do in the air, how they get in the air, a bit of terminology, and some more stuff. Wrong button. There we go. Let's go over what this isn't now. We aren't talking about advanced fluid dynamics, not much of the math that you probably associate with rocket science. And we're not going over Hogwarts wizard magic. I'm sorry, but my name isn't Albus Dumbledore. So we're not going to be using Wingardium Leviosa to get our rockets up. Wingardium Leviosa. I think I pronounced that wrong. Anyways, let's go over some of the units that we're going to be using to measure what we do. Because we gotta measure what we do. When we do it, that's science. The gram and kilogram measure the mass of an object. 1 kilogram is exactly 1,000 grams. Meter and centimeter are for distance, length, altitude. 1 meter is exactly 100 centimeters. We use seconds for time. In particularly long flights in the future, we might even be able to use minutes. Meters per second measures speed. The Newton measures force. And the Newton seconds measures something called the impulse. That is force applied in total over a period of time. That's literally, a Newton second is literally 1 Newton a Newton second is literally 1 Newton of force applied for 1 second straight. Applying 0.2 newtons for 5 seconds, well, 5 times 0.2 is still 1, so 1 Newton second. Part 1. How to push. Rockets essentially push themselves up into the air. Let's try and figure out how that works. They push themselves up into the air using Newton's third law of motion. I'm pretty sure you've all seen this quote before. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. This applies to pushing things as well, such as gases and air, even burning stuff as well. Let's go over something that you might be more familiar with that also uses Newton's third law. This is a propeller. The propeller blade pushes air backwards as an action. The reaction is that the air pushes the propeller blade forwards, equal and opposite. Why does this keep on going backwards there? Okay. Rockets are just propellers that are a bit different because of the way that they push backwards and the way that they get pushed forwards from what they push backwards. This is the structure of a solid rocket engine that we'll be using. Well, not this specific solid rocket engine. We'll be using solid rocket engines. This green stuff is fuel and oxidizer mixture called propellant. This fuel is kind of like well, if you have a fire, then you're going to need like coal and wood or something, or gas. And then you also need air to sustain the fire. Fuel is like the coal or gas or wood, and then the oxidizer is like the air. This keeps a strong flame inside of the combustion chamber. As the flame burns, the propellant becomes a gas and expands inside the combustion chamber. Now, if you'll notice, there's nowhere else to go. There's like the tiny little hole. So it goes out of the hole, and it goes into the nozzle, and it goes absolutely, like, breaks the sound barrier a lot sometimes. Well, in particularly powerful engines. Yeah. The trick is that it goes out of the nozzle while pushing against the nozzle, because remember, it's expanding, and as you can see, the nozzle is kind of a cone shape. So as it expands, it pushes itself out. How does this connect back to Newton's third law? The action is that the burning gas is pushed out and that basically pushes the gas out against the nozzle. The reaction is that it's pushing against the nozzle, so it pushes the rocket upwards through the nozzle. Now that we can get our rocket into the air, how do we make sure that it keeps the pointy end up and the flamey end down? This is a rather complex subject that many very well-funded space programs have struggled with. But before that, let's go over our first new vocabulary for you. Well, other than the word impulse. Center of mass, represented by this gray ball with blue corners and blue lines, is essentially where the rocket bounces around. It's the average point of all mass on the rocket. Put more mass on the front of the rocket, center of mass goes forwards towards that extra mass. It's also where the rocket rotates around most easily. Like where it wants to rotate around, basically. Center of pressure is the average point where air pushes from. If you take a rocket and you push inwards from every surface on the rocket, then the average point where that pressure goes towards, basically, is going to be the center of pressure. We can think of the rocket as a type of lever, where the center of mass is the fulcrum, and these aerodynamic forces are pushing on this little special point called the center of pressure. Let's move over to this side, this right side. You can see the cursor on. Hello. Now, if you push against the center of pressure, it's going to rotate around the center of mass. Of course, this triangle doesn't actually exist on the rocket, but you know, it still rotates around there. Now, why do we put fins on the back? It's because the center of pressure goes towards the fins because the fins have so much surface area. If you put more fin towards the back, then that's more area for you to push in on, like the air. Now, in the real world, rockets don't go perfectly straight, just like how in the real world, bullets don't fire perfectly straight, and there's always going to be some amount of wind. Hell, on very large flight paths, rockets can be tilted by like irregularities in the Earth's gravity from place to place. Now we want the center of pressure behind the center of mass. Why is that? This is because if we're going not perfectly straight, which is, as you may recall, the condition that happens in the real world, we're going to have the center of pressure in front of the center of mass or behind the center of mass. Air pressure is going to push against the center of pressure. So, if we have the center of pressure in front of the center of mass, then that's just going to push the rocket forward, push the rocket away from the direction of travel and more towards the side, until next thing you know, y'all spirally flight path. No one wants to make donuts when you're supposed to be going upwards, because the rocket rotates around the center of mass. If you remember the lever model, then this is the fulcrum. It's pushing around like a lever going around. But if you have the fins in front of behind the center of mass, and you have the center of pressure behind the center of mass, then that air pressure actually works to push the rocket back towards the direction of travel. So, center of pressure behind center of mass, good. Center of pressure in front of center of mass, bad. That is, unless you have some really advanced electronics that we are not going to be able to use. Now we're up. How do we get down? Let's review where we are. So, first thing that happened, the rocket engine ignited. The engine pushed us upwards, and then the engine runs out of fuel, and it turns off. That's called engine cutoff. Right now, we're coasting towards the highest point in the flight, and we're about to come back down. A bit more terminology. Highest point is called apoapsis or apogee. Apoapsis just means highest point above the ground, or above sea level. Apogee means highest point above Earth specifically. Apoapsis can mean highest point above the moon. So yeah, we've all heard this quote before, I assume. What comes up must come down. So we have come up, now we must come down. Now we will get down by parachute, which is the most common option, by deploying a streamer or a ribbon, if we're flying a really small rocket that's really light, or if we're feeling extra brave, then we can tumble down. Parachutes. They're parachutes. They're ejected by a small secondary explosive that essentially shoots the nose cone out forward, and the nose cone drags a parachute along with it. The explosive is very, very weak, but it's just powerful enough to shoot the cone out forward. It's usually triggered by a time delay fuse that starts burning when the engine runs out of fuel. In very sophisticated and very expensive rockets, it can be triggered electronically by like an onboard flight computer or something, instead of just some dumb time delay that's a rough guess at the correct time to deploy. Streamers are just parachutes, but more snake-like. See? That's a rocket. Very tiny rocket. Tumble recovery. Well, you might be thinking, hey, this is crazy. You can't just crash out of the sky. It does have its advantages, though. It's good at saving weight, as in you don't have to bring up a parachute or a streamer. And rockets have to be specifically designed to tumble safely. The secondary charge pushes the rocket body sideways, so that more air hits the oncoming side instead of being cut through by the nose cone. And then that air hitting the side slows the rocket down more effectively, so it can be recovered safely. How do we go further up? Let's use a trick called staging. This is essentially when a big rocket has a small rocket on top of it. You can put more small rockets on top of the small rocket to get rocketception, I mean multi-stage rockets. Each of these independent rockets is called a stage. This is the flight path of a simple rocket, aka a single stage rocket. First, the engine ignites and it launches up. Then the engine runs out of fuel, cut off, goes to the apoapsis, deploys its chute or streamer, and then gently glides to the ground and then gets recovered. Two-stage and multiple-stage rockets are a bit more complex. Let's go through this bit by bit. It'll be easy as pie. Generally speaking, if you see a big table, if you see any big problem, then just go through it little bit by bit. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Always cut off bites instead of chewing the whole thing. So the first stage, which is essentially the bottom half of the rocket, or the bottom part of the rocket, essentially flies like a normal single stage rocket. Except, on top of it you have the second stage, which essentially launches from here and flies like its own independent rocket. Most first stages are recovered by tumble recovery, though. The advantage of staging is that without needing a more powerful motor and without needing that much more effort, honestly, you can give the second stage all the velocity and all the height gained from the first stage, so it can go exponentially higher. This is how you get like above the atmosphere. This is how you get to the moon, to Mars, and hell, this is how you get to interstellar space. So yeah, staging, pretty important. One more thing. Finn can't what? Oh yeah, Finn can't forget that Finn can't doesn't have an apostrophe in it. See, no apostrophe. This is where fins get tilted to the side on purpose. Essentially, The fins being tilted to the side makes the rocket spin, go spinny, and that makes it more stable as it flies up. It's kind of like rifling, where the bullet of a rifle is more stable because it's spinning. So the rocket is more stable because it's spinning. Okay, that's it. So, good night everyone, and thank you for watching. See you on the next meeting.